I'm actually from Nebraska. I wanted to show you, wait, we got one person. Woo! Nebraska! I'm from Lincoln, Nebraska. I went to the college there for a year and then decided I needed to go to an art school. But I wanted to show you some of my parents' work, which is, I don't think either one of them thinks of themselves as artists, but I do, and I know that's where my skills came from. So my dad is this incredible landscape photographer. This is one of his photos. He's spent 20 years photographing the sandhills of Nebraska, which are this, I think Nebraska is always one of these states that they're like, when I say I'm from there, like, oh, I drove through there, and it was the boringest drive ever. But anyway, I feel like this affinity towards natural beauty, land and sky. I actually, on my jewelry website, which is db-cb.com, I pair a bunch of photos of my jewelry with my dad's photographs because I'm so in love with them. I went to the Sandhills and tried to shoot some photos like his to put on my website, and they all turned out. I realized you can't just do that. You have to spend years with it and stare at the sky and really be absorbed. So, and my mom is, I suppose I could say their name. One is David Baxter, one is Joanna Baxter. She's a quilt maker, really skilled, slightly, I always think it's slightly insane to make. Has anyone made a quilt? It's so hard. If you want it square, you have to really measure well. But, so up in the corner here is a picture of my mom and her two sisters in a Japanese magazine because behind it is a quilt my great-grandma made. In Lincoln, Nebraska, there's I think it's called the International Quilt Study Center that has shows of quilts, and it's actually quite amazing. A couple more of my mom's. Oh, and look at their holding hands. I don't know, every year I try to sneak up behind them on the couch and photograph them holding hands because I think it's so adorable that they've been together 50 years. This tells you what a sap I am, and this sappiness shows up a lot in my work. Instead of jumping where I'm at now, I wanted to show you, this is older work, me trying to figure out what's going on while I was at Bard. I did a lot of work about safety, about shelters, there's always these themes around levity and weight, ideas around saving yourself. I always have had this slight, I don't want to call it self-helpy, but a little bit self-help, or making fun of self-helpy stuff. So this is obviously self-helpy. So this is, the other thing I wanted to quote, and this isn't my quote, this is, I think it's Sophia Coppola talking about Kim Gordon. How about that for a quote? She draws power from vulnerability, and I love that quote, and I think it's out of the New York Times, and drawing power from vulnerability is a lot of what my work is about. As awkward as we all are with our vulnerable moments, there's a lot of strength that can come from the difficult things we go through. So this is very first alabaster piece I made, and it was a turning point in my work. It's called Gene Simmons Inspires Me. I'm glad, yeah. We got him laughing early, yay. So this is from 2006. I was in have any of you been to New York City in the Complete Sculptor? No, only Straw probably. But the Complete Sculptor is this whole store just for sculptors of all these casting supplies. I went there for something else, and their whole basement is full of rocks. And I feel like I had some divine vision when I walked down there. I was overwhelmed by the rocks, and I had this weird vision that I needed to carve Gene Simmons' tongue. I swear to God. And even though, when you have those thoughts, even though they're insane and they may not make any sense with what you're working on, you have to listen to them, honestly, unless you're schizophrenic. But so I was down in the basement, holding up a rock, telling this large black man I wanted to carve Gene Simmons' tongue. And he's like, oh, that rock's too small. His tongue's 8.5 inches. I don't know how this guy knew the exact length of his tongue. But anyway, so part of what this has to do with is, I have a few tongues in my work. That's I haven't done a tongue in a while, but partially because they have this sensualness and they have this disgustingness that I like this balance between beautiful and gross. Which actually these two materials are kind of, one's beautiful and one's kind of gross. And this is weathered foam. I was also on this kick in grad school. I was obsessed with flotation devices of various kinds, inflatables, boats. I made a tent boat. It was a tent pontoon, actually. But I should have brought a picture of that. So that kind of launched me on this obsession with alabaster that I still kind of have. I'm trying to like integrate it with other materials so I'm not dependent on it. So this is supposed to be a neck, and part of why I'm interested in necks is it's the place that your voice lives. It's the place between your head and your heart. It's an unusual thing to truncate a neck and not put the head or the body. And often people look at my necks and don't know that they're necks, which I think might be okay. Even, I think somebody thought this was an elephant foot, which, what can you do? This is Outcast gave me an asthma attack. So I have asthma. Another form of my vulnerability is my body and my lungs, unfortunately. Anyone who has asthma knows how important inhaler is and how it can save your life and how this object becomes sacred because it can save your life, and the kind of comfort that you have if you have it. It's interesting, I was changed purse before I came and I thought I forgot my inhaler, and I was just in the bathroom right before this, ruffling through my stuff, making sure I had my inhaler because it's such a fear that you're gonna die. The feeling of on your way to suffocation is totally terrifying. And I play with that a little bit in my work. So this is untitled speed bag. So this is a punching bag with a balloon on it. I didn't bring many pictures of this, but I used balloons in my work a little bit, partially because they have this childlike innocence, joy, sappy cheesiness that goes with them. And then juxtaposing with a punching bag, something very light and heavy. And punching bags obviously have to do with a certain amount of violence and destruction. Speaking of punching, this was the first piece I made that goes on your body. It's a tongue that you wear as a brass knuckle and punch someone with. So it's crystal, no, wait, I'm getting all my brass knuckles. It's funny that I've made that many brass knuckles that I could confuse them. But this is Brass Knuckle Tongue Hurts So Good from 2007. So this piece and my most recent brass knuckles, I'll show you later, is Devil Horns Brass Knuckles. They're both going to be in this show called Protective Ornament that's actually going to be a traveling show, which I'm super excited about, curated by the editor of Metalsmith magazine, Susan Ramjack. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with cypress trees, or this is called a cypress knee. The cypress trees grow into swamps and then they have these root projections that come back out. Nobody quite knows why. They think they might be trying to get air. But I was in my studio looking at this, trying to figure out how to make this about containing air. And finally came to the conclusion that if I made a tie of the balloon on the tip, that it would maybe read that way. I carved that entire thing with an X-Acto knife. I wouldn't recommend it. But so then there's this transition where I stopped using, I guess I still use traditional sculptor materials, but I started integrating crystals and minerals into it. And I remember also why, when I put these geodes into this ramp, I remember thinking, why am I doing this? This has nothing to do with any of my work. But again, in your studio, when you have this compulsion to do something, just do it and try not to. That judgy voice is very dangerous in the creative process. So I didn't explore this too much farther, but I was really interested in ramps and things that would launch you. So this piece is called Suck It Up, and it's a hyperventilation bag. And it's the whole idea that you have a panic attack or anxiety, and this is the prop that soothes that anxiety. For me, I'm still trying to figure out this association. For me, power and crystals go together. Not so much in a new agey woo-woo way, but even though that's probably there a tiny bit, and I'll show you why. Superman. So I saw the Superman movie when I was, I think, 7 years old or something. And it was strong, very influential. And I have this whole association between crystals, the Fortress of Solitude, and power and empowerment. And it's funny, like, how much of my work is about not just the act of making it is healing, but I feel like all my themes are around healing myself and making myself feel more comfortable and more powerful. And this makes no sense after Superman, but I just wanted to show you this Ecstasy of St. Therese that I'm sure all of you have seen in art history. One of my favorite pieces of all time, although I've never seen it in person. I need to go to Rome. And part of what I think is interesting about this piece is, or the way it's been described by certain art historians, is the ecstasy she is feeling is conveyed in the folds of the fabric, because they're very animated. So if you don't know the story, it's about a nun, St. Therese, who had this experience where she was lifted out of her bed and the love of God was plunged through her heart like an arrow. And the way she wrote about it was describing this kind of orgasmic ecstasy. And I think at the time Bernini made this, it was very like, ooh, that's so racy. But it's really a powerful, beautiful piece. And I don't want to compare myself too much to Bernini, or I'll just shoot myself. But it's some of those traditions are what keeps me interested in working with stone. This is the first pillow I made. The thing that's interesting, I don't know if it's interesting, it might be interesting about this pillow, is the belt around it is my grandpa Paulson's, who is now deceased. He was an electrical engineer, and he was the first, no, he was not the first, but he made a quartz crystal radio. And I remember him getting it to work, and they still sell kits to make quartz crystal radios. I remember him getting it to work when I was a kid and listening to it actually pick up a radio signal. And I feel like that in some way ingrained in my mind that crystals aren't just beautiful rocks, they actually have a use in electronics, and there is something real about them in science. So since we're talking about pillows, part of why I keep going back to it, because I just made several pillows I'll show you at the end, but this is Felix Gonzalez Torres. I think it's just called Bed, and it was made into a billboard that I think is still being made today. It's one of my favorite pieces of all time because it's so poignant, and it's so full of longing, and it's slightly pathetic. And I find maybe it's a little strange. I'm interested in pathetic and I'm interested in failure, but it really pulls at your heartstrings and is a very powerful piece. So this was a show I had at Howard House in Seattle before it closed. So I have gotten now, I'm on my third grant from For Culture. I highly recommend, if you're an artist, you graduate, start applying for grants. For Culture is awesome. So the grant I wrote was to make a table to house all my work. I think it was called Timetable. I don't know if I kept that title so much, about how placing things on a table, it's read differently, almost like a poem or like a sentence. And if you're a sculptor, how many of here would identify as being a sculptor? Come on, there's 2. There's 4 of you. Woo, sculptors. Anyway, one of the biggest problems with sculpture is that you have to figure out what it sits on. And I know that it sounds like not that big of a deal, but I spent my whole last chunk of grad school trying to figure out, where do these things live? I make these objects. What is the perfect space for them to live? And it is the most confusing question that still plagues me. But in this case, I decided, instead of having a whole bunch of white pedestals or putting them on a shelf, I made this custom-made table that's steel and wood. So also in this show, part of what I was trying to do is engage the floor underneath. I had one piece on the floor. I have this piece that's cast from an African lion tongue. Clearly, I did not do that. And engaging the floor. So this piece, I don't know, maybe you have seen. Has anybody seen this? Have you seen it because you looked me up or just because it floated around the internet? Internet, yeah. So this is, so I made this piece a few months after that show, and so it's called Crystal Brass Knuckles. I'm gonna realign your chakras, motherfucker. It's obviously trying to be hilarious and ridiculous, and it's trying to combine these two things that don't make sense together, which are like hip hop, badass, tool for killing and healing, and this new agey thing. And I'm really interested in juxtaposing things. I'm using that word, juxtapose. Things that don't make sense or contradict each other. So this piece is this is like a phenomenon that happened. I made this piece, a friend in San Francisco put it on her art blog, and boom, it hit the internet, and it's still going today, and it went super viral. Like, all over the world, has a life of its own. And I don't know, whenever something, I don't know, the thing about something going viral is it doesn't necessarily mean it's good. It could be just like a baby panda sneezing. You know, it could, you know, the different things, but it's an interesting thing nonetheless, because if there's no way to track it either. I would love to know all who have made or have seen this piece. So this piece, because it went viral, I ended up getting in a whole bunch of magazines, as well as tons and tons of blogs. Blogs in languages I could not read. So it was in Zoo magazine in Germany, Design Bureau, Elderweiss magazine, which is all written in French. I still don't know what that says, but Zinc magazine. Yeah. It also is what stemmed my interest in making jewelry, even though I think that might be one of the coolest pieces of jewelry I'll ever make. So a kind of side business that I accidentally started was making jewelry, partially because I'm obsessed with crystals and minerals, and I wanted an excuse to buy them and figure out how to wear them. But more what that has to do with, instead of just general adornment, it has to do with the idea of objects having an innate power on them on their own. And I've been starting to research this. I have this huge stack of books about the power of objects, the history of different stones, how they've been used all the way through biblical times. And it's super fascinating. I'm really interested in the idea of you wearing something and it making you feel more powerful. Like today, I'm wearing my grandpa's dog tag from World War II on my arm. And it's really hard not to wear this, other than to be sentimental and go like, think what he went through with this, and now I have it on, like it's very intense. I feel like somehow objects are imbued with a certain energy that is carried. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I'm gonna believe it. So this is a deer jaw. I found in the sandhills of Nebraska, dug it up, my dad thought I was nuts. Decided to make it into a necklace with 2 teeth that are citrine. So most of my necklaces, I make more necklaces, I make some rings, but are just big crystals or big stones that are some way encased in metal. And the thing that's a little bit funny about it is I make them out of wax and then I have them cast. I don't actually know how to solder. I think most jewelers want to punch me in the face, or I also make this kind of strange distinction between my jewelry and art where I think, this is my art and this is my jewelry, and some of the jewelry crosses over to art, but some of it is just me making beautiful things, which also drives some jewelers insane, because it's like, my jewelry's not my art. Like, that's just, when actually for most, fine jewelers, that is their art. But that's a whole other controversy between art and craft. But for me, what starts making a piece art, other than awesomeness, it also has to have like this concept behind it. For me, that's what makes the difference. And the other thing that's funny is, what makes something a piece of art is that I was slightly tortured over it. But with jewelry, it's like me drawing or just doodling. I'm like watching TV and making this stuff. So this is called faux hawk. It's another neck, although, again, you may not know it's a neck. There's this muscle along your neck called the sternoclaviomastoid that I always try to show. Like, that's probably the only defining factor that would make anyone think it's a neck. This is one where I kind of followed the natural form of the stone and then embedded smoky quartz into it. When I do this, it's obviously to make it look like it's growing out of the stone. It's not. I think some people actually have asked me if that's happening. It's more me with tweezers and epoxy sticking little stones in. So this piece is called You Have to Believe We Are Magic, barf bag. So You Have to Believe You Are Magic is this Olivia Newton-John song from Xanadu that I secretly love. I guess it's not a secret. I find it very inspiring. But it's also, I have this thing for myself where when things get cheesy, they also make me want to barf. But, and these inspirational things like You Have to Believe You're Magic. But the stone that's in this is called bismuth, and it's a lab-grown stone from Germany. It kind of looks a little Star Trek-y. It's this crazy, the first time I saw it, I just couldn't get it, like, what kind of crazy matrix is that? But I just find it interesting that it's the same thing that's in Pepto-Bismol. Hence the barf bag in Pepto. This is the quote that Shaw had was about your life like your life depends on it. This is the piece that it's actually called Like Your Life Depends on It. It's these two punching bags. I find the use of punching bags interesting because it really is something that you beat up. It's something that makes your body want to react in a certain way. Maybe not this one, but when they're hanging, they kind of make you want to punch. And this one's mainly about these two punching bags that have had the crap beat out of them, and they're kind of just spooning in this pathetic state. Oh, we got an awe. They're also meant to be lobes of the lungs, because I think, unfortunately, a repeated thing that's happened, partially if I get a cold, I have to go to the ER because of my asthma, if it ends up in my chest. And also, regardless to my many attempts at safety, sometimes the alabaster gets in my lungs, so that's a good time. So this is a weird interlude. This is Rachel Harrison's work. Have any of you heard of her? Nobody, come on. Okay, so she was one of my grad school professors. It might be, if you lived in New York City and you were studying art, you definitely know who she was. But she's the kind of artist that I think, for someone that doesn't know anything about art, could potentially rub you the wrong way. It maybe could rub you the wrong way anyway. But is like, what, a blob on a thing, and what, is it a can on it, you know? But the thing that most of her work has that I'm interested in is that she generally, the pedestals are part of the piece and they're usually integrated. the particular one on the right is more like an installation made with a big pile of pedestals. I feel like there's a lot of artists that comment on pedestals. Oh crap, I think I'm one of them. So this is a piece of mine. Sometimes I vacillate between, oh, my work's so beautiful, and you can tell, like, oh, it's a punching bag. Oh, it's, like I get concerned that it's too conservative, and then I do some crazy shit. And then I go back to conservative, and then crazy shit. But I don't know, anyone making crystal brass knuckles, I don't know why they think they're conservative. But, so this is called Hellbent. This, such a strange piece, but I really actually love this piece, mainly because I built this pedestal for it, which was another one of my 4 culture grants, was to make bases for my sculpture. And because there was this show in New York City called Unmonumental at the new museum that pretty much every piece in the whole show, the pedestals were absorbed into the sculpture. It wasn't an afterthought at all. So this is me making a pedestal out of steel grid, and part of the point is to make this dent in the top of it. Although I think it might be too neatly made, so that the object on top is actually making an imprint in the pedestal. Another pedestal piece is, I think this is called Hoping Something Pure Can Last, which I think is a line in an Arcade Fire song. I kind of steal a lot of lines from songs, or titles of songs, as you will see as we go forward. Music's pretty influential in various ways. So this piece, using a pedestal on its side, the object on top of it is petrified wood, another neck, and then the back of the petrified wood has this incredible crystal block, like pod things growing on it. When I received it, I actually got it in Nebraska and had it sent to me. I thought it was dirty, so I washed it in the bathtub with all these bubbles, and that's what that photograph is on the end. I thought the matrix of the bubbles and the crystals was interesting. The other thing I have a bad habit of doing is deconstructing what I make. So if I ever have a retrospective, I'm gonna be, these are now like 3 other pieces. So I have a few pieces that are like, I don't wanna say maybe more formal. This one's playing with this it's called a pyrite twin, when 2 pieces of pyrite cubes grow together, one out of the other. And I just love that. This is called From the Hip. It's a piece that was sort of a commission that was, because of the whole viral situation, this place in Paris found me and asked me to make a piece to go on a model, to be photographed, to be in a book. So I made this, sent it to Paris, and I never got a picture back of the model. But anyway, so this is, I feel like a little bit guided by what was asked of me, instead of like, I don't know that I would have made a holster otherwise, but I get really infatuated with how beautiful rocks are. You can probably tell that. And I'm really careful when I cut a stone, or specifically alabaster, where the veins in the piece hit, that are gonna look best in the piece. Louise Bourgeois. I don't know that I want to totally compare myself to Louise Bourgeois, but who doesn't love Louise Bourgeois? The part, other than she has carved stone, I think the other similarity is there's something about, sometimes she makes body parts that are unrecognizable, but they still feel bodily. And the other thing I was thinking about Louise Bourgeois recently is that we all know her work, seen it, but none of us have ever tried to well, unless you're an art historian, really try to isolate, what does it all mean? I've also watched the movie, it was kind of a documentary about her. Did any of you see that? Anyway, apparently not. And how, I don't know, I don't know why I'm always bothered by this, regardless to going to grad school and doing tons of writing. Me having to explain what my art means always, that sounds horrible to say, but it bugs me a little bit, because so much of this is truly intuitive, and then honestly, it takes me years later to figure out what it means. But I was thinking, Louise Bourgeois, do any of us even are that concerned with what it means? We're just so blown away because her work's amazing. And sadly, she died a few years ago. So this is called In the Rough. And this piece is one of the, every once in a while, I don't know if any of you have this happen, I make a piece and it actually scares me. Like, it actually slightly grosses me out, that I'm like, okay, time to call a therapist. What's this all about? So this piece is kind of like this lacy, ornate, beautiful thing, and then has a kind of tongue falling out of it, which is, I'm interested in the tongue, like I said, about the voice. I'm particularly interested in the female voice. There's, I don't know if any of you have heard of Anne Carson. She is often a poet, but she wrote this really amazing paper called The Gender of Sound. And it is talking about this whole idea of the female voice in history being thought of as kind of insane and hysterical, and how we have this unique power to emote, but when we do, it freaks people out. So a lot of my power, a lot of my power. Could I say power more in one talk? A lot of my work has this underlying, feminist piece to it that has to do with, girl power. I was just thinking about this, that Riot Girl thing. I feel like it all started at Evergreen. Evergreen is such an interesting, melting pot of so many, famous people have come through Olympia and have associations to Evergreen. Not only, the whole grunge era, but, even in Kate Hardy, and is a performance artist in New York. She's like, oh yeah, I lived in Evergreen. I think she worked for Miranda July. It's, I don't know, I find it really interesting, whatever, it's like Florence during the Renaissance. Maybe not quite that good, but okay, that might have been a tiny bit of a stretch. But whatever's going on here, I don't know if I understand it, because I obviously haven't spent a lot of time here, but it's something magic's going on here, so good job, faculty and students. Anyway, but I do think there's some Riot Girl thing that started here, this DIY thing. So that, the other thing I didn't mention about the crystal brass knuckles is it's meant to fit a woman's hand. That was a key component to it's meant to give women power, not a dude, unless he has a really tiny hand. The other thing about that piece that I didn't mention is it was in a gallery in London and was stolen, which luckily they had insurance, but the thing that was so interesting about it is that the two guys that came in multiple times to kind of pace the joint so they could steal it, the police in London actually thought they were professional criminals, which means someone might have hired them to steal it. So I have this fantasy of some Asian woman in Dubai that's really wealthy, hired these thugs to steal my piece. It's probably not the case, unfortunately. Anyway, so this piece In the Rough. The other thing about the tongue is part of my thesis at Bard was there's this book called The Eyes of the Skin, Architecture and the Senses. That is, within it talks about that, there's this quote from it talking about all your perception starts in your oral cavity, which is really a bizarre thought, and I think it has more to do with like babies being born and the first thing they do is eat. So this is a piece that is the sleeve of a blouse kind of thing with a button that is a heart. So it's called A Heart on My Sleeve, and it's also called Big Mouth because I thought it looked a little bit like a big mouth bass. This piece, I had this idea for, I had this blouse that this idea came off. I cut this sleeve off this blouse and had it sitting around for probably 3 years. And usually if I have an idea that lasts that long, even though, because usually I'll question it and be like, why would I make a blouse? Like, that makes no sense. What does that have to do with everything? And I think to some degree the whole heart on the sleeve part of it has to do with, you'd probably have to know me, but I think this kind of idea of being transparent and showing people your feelings. This piece is called Love Me Tender. Speaking of, I'm kind of, as you can tell, embracing cheesy sappiness and embracing, this has taken me a while, but I'm kind of embracing beauty. I know that's not cool to make beautiful art, but the last show I had at Platform, I remember meeting with my friend DW afterwards, and I was like, it's so pretty, I can't stand it. Like, and he's like, you gotta own it, you gotta own the beauty. So, screw it, I make beautiful things. And ornate things and kind of embracing the ornateness and how too much of it can almost be gross. I've been meaning to do, this has been something that's happened more in my head than on paper, but comparing the Baroque period with hip hop. And this idea of kind of overindulgence and then over ornateness and a lot of gold, a lot of stones, a lot of like way over the top, and what that means. So this is a pelvis, maybe you already said that. This was in the Bellevue Art Museum in a show called Making Men's, about different art that's had to do with healing. And another piece that's called Almost Better. That, I think this one actually is kind of in the family of where it could reference a body part or something, but it's not specifically trying to reference anything. And that, I am putting up 2 pictures of it because one of them shows the crystals a little bit better. And what I think is important about this piece, this is so funny that I don't know if anyone would notice this, I think it's important that it goes off the edge of the pedestal. I really don't like things sitting squarely on the pedestal. And I feel like it drastically changes the piece. So last February, I went to the Soundgarden show in Seattle. Any of you there? No. I am older than you. Darn it, come on, people. Anyway, I guess I'm way older than you. Okay, so I love Soundgarden. I loved early Soundgarden. I went to the show. Amazing. Some of the grunge still lives in Enumclaw, and some of them have mullets. No, I don't know where Enumclaw is. I don't even know what I'm talking about. But it was a funky crowd. Anyway, so at the show, between the songs, there was this crazy sea of devil horns, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever, and it was so beautiful. I wish I would have had a better camera with the light behind it, just like, everybody put up devil horns. So I took this photo with my phone, and I couldn't figure out what to do with it, and I almost did a drawing from it, and then I realized I don't really draw, but this is what ended up happening. So I made devil horn crystal brass knuckles, mosh safely. So this is also going to be in that travel-y show, because even though I like the Olivia Newton-John song, I think most of my roots are probably a little bit more punk rock, and me going to shows when I was 15, couldn't even drive yet, trying to mosh. That's a really funny thought. The guy I had a crush on had a mohawk. I thought it was so cool. Anyway, so there's that. This is another one. After I made this, I'm like, since the first one went viral, I was like, I wonder if this will go viral. It has not gone viral like the other one has. No, it has a little bit, actually. I put it on Tumblr. Are any of you on Tumblr? If you're on Tumblr, you should follow me, Debra Baxter Studio. I'm also D Baxter Studio on Twitter, and Debra Baxter Studio on Facebook. I'm really into social media. That's a whole nother topic. But anyway, man, I totally lost my train of thought. This piece on Tumblr has now up to almost 75,000 retumbles. That's insane. What? Who are these people and why aren't they paying me? Fascinating. I find the internet so fascinating, and I almost put this whole section in my talk about social media, but I decided not to. But I highly recommend if for art, or especially like for my jewelry, Instagram, and it really helps you reach a crowd of like minds. I heard some moans from this. Is that right? This is one of those in 5 years. I'll tell you what it's about. But my friend Dawn came in my studio and was like, "Oh, this is dark." Yes, it kind of is. But I kept hearing the song from 9 Inch Nails called "Head Like a Hole," almost in a sarcastic way. But a few years ago, I had this idea to carve an alabaster, like a human with a hoodie, but the whole interior of the hoodie was crystals. That never happened, but it kind of weirdly manifested into this. So there's kind of this, head-neck situation. I wasn't necessarily meaning for this to be violent, or because of all the crystals, even if they're dark colored and purple, I always think of them as, oh my gosh, like enlightenment and power. How cheesy is that? This is Niagara Falls frozen like a week ago when they had the polar vortex that we kind of missed out on. Beautiful, huh? It's gonna make the next piece not look as good. But I have this piece called Thin Ice that seeing that picture after I made this kind of reminded me. I got some blue alabaster and I was so excited about it. It's so beautiful. It turns out it's super hard to carve and it does not behave the same way as alabaster. So I had some trouble with it. It ended up kind of turning into a nondescript, could be folds, some organic shape. But it also has this mirror on the top. But more importantly, where I felt like this piece took a turn for me, if I should have brought the succession of all the, this would be interesting to see every step that happens, because when I work on a sculpture, it's like, and then it's upside down, and then it's on its side, and now it's doing this, and now it's on the floor, and that, it's never like linear. It's linear in the last piece I'll show you because I had a very specific plan, but generally it's constant experimentation and trying to look at it in a way that you hadn't before, whether that means turning it upside down or not. So this, I could cut a little notch out of the corner and had it going off the side of a pedestal, which again, I think is really important. I wanted it to look like it was about to jump off or slump over and fall off, to kind of create uncomfortable tension. Okay, so here we go with the mother lode. Are you ready? There's the mother lode. So I think it's almost a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, I decided to write another For Culture grant, because I love For Culture, and they love giving me grants. So I wrote this. So have you seen this piece in art history? It is Durer, 6 pillows. It's a drawing out of his sketchbook. It's a pen and ink drawing. I always thought it was an etching because he's so well known for his etchings, but this is actually a pen and ink drawing. I decided to write a grant to make these in 3-dimensional in alabaster. When I got the envelope and opened it and got the grant, I think my first reaction was like, oh my God, now I have to do it! You know, like, because I knew this was going to be the hardest thing I've ever done. Like, I have grand ideas, and then executing them and knowing the physical labor that's going to go into it, it's a whole other story. Although I'm really grateful to have gotten the grant. This is the backside of the paper. It was just a part of his sketchbook. Very strange self-portrait and a hand. And so most likely these were just studies of him practicing drawing. But what you'll notice, or what I noticed, because I've spent such a ridiculous amount of time looking at this drawing, is that there are these weird curls and exaggerations, and these are animated in a way that a normal pillow cannot make, because I actually had real pillows that I tried to put in these positions, and it's not real. For me, what interested me about this drawing is it kind of has to do with that Felix Gonzalez Torres. Something about an empty pillow, or these particularly look like they're struggling, has this sense of like longing and, I don't know, almost a little bit of emptiness. And just general tormentedness. That sounds so artisty. I'm tormented, I want to make tormented art. I'm not actually tormented, I've got a good life. Anyway, so I had to order these rocks from California on a freight, and I think this is over 600 pounds of rock. That is an apple for scale. That is a big apple, by the way. It's a Honeycrisp. This is the before picture, and then these are the way I did it is, this is one of the only linear projects I've ever done. The way I did it is I enlarged the drawing, figured out the scale I wanted. I had a really hard time trying to figure out what the size of a pillow was in 1493, which is when he drew it. Does anyone know? I consulted a lot of people, and it turned out we think they're probably smaller because standard sized pillows are really quite big, but that's a little bit of a mystery. And the scale of them varies quite a bit. There's one pillow that's way bigger than the rest. So this is how they lined up. And then this is the lift I had to get in my studio because they were all over 100 pounds to get them on the table where I would roll the table outside and work in the rain. Doesn't that sound fun? And so this is just the very beginning, I think, of the first pillow where I knew I was in trouble, I think. No. So the thing that's funny, okay, I'm a self-taught carver. I actually, the first time I carved, I couldn't find a picture of this. I did this sandstone carving in 8th grade with a screwdriver and a hammer, and somehow it ended up looking like a face. The way I have taught myself to carve is not with a chisel as much as a grinder and belt sander and all these different tools. So the thing, in order to cut through this much, I realized the grinder I had was too small, so I had to buy a much, probably like 3 times the size. Like a normal grinder is this big, and then it's the problem with it being that big, even though it'll rip through, has a lot of horsepower, can rip through stone. It's really heavy, and you can only work for so long. As buff as I look, it was difficult for me to maneuver and work. My dad was so scared I was going to cut one of my legs off. But so the other thing that I think is funny, I will tell you also, I started this, realized it was really, really hard. And so what do? I watched some YouTube videos on how to carve rock. Yeah, woo, YouTube. And what I learned from YouTube is that what I call the avocado method, where you make this grid and then you take a chisel and take each little chunk out at a time. You make a grid like you do inside of an avocado. Still very difficult, but so here's some more process. Them when they're roughed out. These are some very romanticized pictures I took on Instagram of the beauty of sanding. Aren't they pretty? I have a lot of romanticized pictures on Instagram. I'm Debra Baxter Shitty on Instagram too, if you want to follow me. This is a kind of example of before and after sanding or somewhere in different processes, because they were very, after you get them roughed out, you take a rasp. And now I now own like a lot of different rasps, one that is like this long, to kind of rough it out. I'm sorry if I sound like pained by this project, but it was so hard. Like, and there they are. Aren't you supposed to clap? No, okay. Okay. I love it when you have to ask for applause. Anyway, so the thing that happened, I'll show you the next one. The thing that happened between, so they were this beautiful powdery color, and then they turned into this weird gelatinous color. And when I sanded them and shined them up and that happened, I started crying. I was like, I also might have been hysterical, and oh, speaking of hysteria, I might have been just exhausted, like perhaps, but I was really grossed out by this. I was like, I thought it was gonna be this beautiful powdery thing, and then I had I brought like 5 artists over to my studio to figure out, should I go back to the sanded state, or should I leave it in this state, or I feel like every little decision around this piece took me a month. So anyway, I left him like this. And I'm actually happy. I actually decided I'm okay with the beautiful / grossness and the weird bodily. It really has this like body sack thing, for better or worse. But it's one of those things I spent so much time on, I don't know that I can see it clearly, or I have space from this. Like you can see some of these curls, that's not, a normal pillow will never do that. I had this whole other part of making them in real fabric and then making the fabric hard, and that was another kind of model I used. The other thing I should mention is, even though I don't want to, is in the middle of this project, even though I had a full face respirator that I was fitted for, and a zip-up outfit, and every safety thing you can imagine, I inhaled a bunch of alabaster. I think there was some sort of leak, and got really sick, mainly aggravated my asthma so that I couldn't walk around the block without having an asthma attack. And then when I did have that asthma attack, it'd take me like half an hour to get over that. Which is unusual. Some asthma attacks can go away very quickly. But so what I had to do is hire someone to help me, which is interesting because I don't mind that if artists have assistants, but when part of the point of my art is that I know how to carve and I'm going to do it. It's not about like, I had a great idea to carve pillows and I'm going to hire this dude to carve them for me. But the funny thing is, regardless, I put so much work into it, and then I hired someone to work on them, and then I had to finish them. I don't feel like I cheated, even though you know what I mean? I was still excruciating. And even the sanding part that I thought was like, oh, I'll get them back from him. He left them pretty rough, and I was like, I'll just sand them, and that took another month or so. That doesn't sound very positive, does it? But the other thing that was a month-long decision was, obviously in the drawing there's 6 pillows, and in this there's 5. So I originally had planned in this hole to have this crystallized piece of rock, And it turned out when I was finished, it didn't work. It just didn't work. And so I spent literally a month putting so many different things in that hole to be like, I made a pillow out of all these different materials. I made, I thought maybe a wacky found object in there would be good. And it was such a weird realization to realize the answer is nothing. Like the answer is leaving the hole. Isn't that deep? No, the answer is to have the absence, and it makes me so uncomfortable to not have that hole there that I think that's part of what makes it work is the longing that's involved. It's hard to explain. At least I hope so, because I'm not carving another one. But anyway, I think that's the end of my photos. And I'll give you a minute to regroup, and then we'll have questions. Oh, I see a dude back there. Talk loud.
I'll try.
Okay.
I really liked your presentation, and I want to encourage you to go towards some of that social media stuff. And I want to put a little contour on it, thinking about your practice as a sculptor.
Huh.
And thinking about the various media you work with.
Uh-huh.
Is there a way in which the kind of time you spend on what is called in the vernacular social media
Yeah.
is a form of sculpture, rather than just a form of marketing
Yeah.
or publicity or etc.?
Well, for me, this would be Instagram specific. I think for me, Instagram helps me with my like taking a lot of photos of my work helps me with my process and helps me think about it more, and taking photos of materials. But yeah, that's interesting to think about. I don't know that I did not start using Instagram because I was trying to like publicize myself and get rich. But I did it because I wanted to see what my friends were making. The thing that I like best about Instagram is I follow a whole bunch of people that make stuff, a bunch of jewelers, some fashion people, sculptors, really some kick-ass artists. And honestly, the thing that I find interesting about it is their work and the stuff they acquire, like sometimes they're just objects, the stuff they photograph inspires me, but when I was working on those pillows and was outside in the rain and would photograph what I'm doing, put it on Instagram, I would get like 20 people going, yeah, go! And I was like, this is so weird that like these virtual friends are like cheering me on. And it's funny, I would put the same photo on Facebook and on Instagram. I've done this before, I'm always interested to see. And Instagram, all the things I put on that are visual and about my art, Instagram, people just go nuts because I have like, I don't know, 400 something followers that are mostly people that make stuff. But I also have learned from social media, just because somebody thumbs up something, doesn't mean it's good. Yeah?
You talk about your work being sort of stolen, and you don't seem to be too negative when you talk about that, and you talk about putting things on the internet, which I've had like artist friends tell me like, don't ever do that because you'll lose ownership.
Oh.
How concerned are you about ownership?
Oh, sheesh, I should think about that, huh? No. I think that's more of a problem if you're a photographer. Like, I know there's this whole Facebook, I mean, I know they're evil and they own whatever you put up there and they can do whatever they want with it, and that's horrifying. I try not to think about it. But and luckily they changed their rules on Instagram because they were almost going to do that on Instagram too. But for me, the thing that is weird is that how the crystal brass knuckles went viral, and I bet like 90% of the time my name was not on it, you know? Like that's the thing when things are retumbled or reblogged. But I also wouldn't have strangely, I would not have the career I have if people hadn't found me on the internet. Almost everybody finds me on the internet. Very few people. I mean, I'm in Seattle and I have a show every 2 years. When are you going to see my work? But it is something to be, especially if you're a photographer, to be very like, conscious of putting a copyright on there, on watermark your stuff. But I guess it doesn't bother me if somebody takes an image of mine and reuses it that much. As long as they're saying good things. I don't know. Does that help at all? That's a little vague. Were you going to ask a question?
I was. You kept saying for culture, but I just wanted you to spell it for
Oh, it's the number 4,
Oh.
and then culture. I know. It's pretty.
I wrote FOR, so
I think it used to be for culture a few years ago, and then they changed it. Yes.
So I noticed that in a lot of your work, there's this really interesting juxtaposition between kind of more organic form and organic line, like in some of your metal cast and the alabaster,
Mhm.
and then that's really consciously juxtaposed with this strong geometric component of these crystals. And I thought that was really fascinating. And also, those crystalline structures really reminded me of like mountain landscapes. And I know in Chinese gardens, you know, the ancient art was you're kind of creating a microcosm, right? And every little stone represents a whole mountain. And so I was just kind of working with those two ideas together, and I was wondering if you could speak at all about the organic and inorganic tension there.
I think I'd like to have a certain amount of structure within a lot of the organic thing, or I guess I have this line of wanting things to be really clean and minimal, along with something that's ornate or something to like soften it. To be perfectly honest, I don't know. It's a horrible thing to say, but it's fairly intuitive, and it's a lot of formal choices that don't always have to do with content and why I make those choices. Hate to say it. I'm obviously not a super conceptual artist. I mean, there's ideas, but I'm not like hyper conceptual artist. You?
I'm curious about what you said about kind of your resistance to making something that's too beautiful or too ornate. And I think that's a question that a lot of artists I hear wrestling with. And I'm curious about where you think that pressure might be coming from. And also why you think it's important to resist that, or what you think there's something important about overdoing something with Baroque or hip-hop, something that you have done too much. It's really important about that too.
I think for me, it was specifically going to Bard and the contemporary sculpture that's coming out of New York City. Not always, but there's a lot, like what they called it at Bard is slapdash. Have you ever heard that term? It's like something that looks like just a couple blobs thrown together. That doesn't look like it had skill. And I think like Rachel Harrison, the queen of blobs, oh man, she would punch me if she heard me say that. But she, having that influence of found object, kind of sarcasm, taking a beer can, and you know, there's a lot of I must feel some sort of pressure from what people made at Bard in the sculpture department was not fine carving of like any classical way. It was very few things were trying to be at all beautiful. So it's kind of, and I really think me carving stone was almost a rebellion against that. It's because if you Google stone sculpture, you get more ugly crap than you can imagine. Like, it is not the coolest thing to do. And especially in contemporary art, to take a contemporary idea and then use a really old material is a very unusual, or I feel like it's somewhat unusual. Yeah, I don't know what my struggle is about that. It's probably the same struggle I have with the Olivia Newton-John song of like, I love really gushy, beautiful things, but then I'm embarrassed and grossed out by it. So I am trying to switch that thinking and go for it and surrender to beauty. Yeah. Yes?
So I had a funny moment last year where I had a piece of quartz and I was kind of messing around with it, and I was going to make it into a ring, but I turned it sideways, and I was just like, holy crap, if I got this really huge piece that I could make these big quartz brass knuckles. And I went to Evan with it, and he was like, oh, you mean like Debra Baxter? And I was like, what? Like, what the hell? And then I saw your piece, and I was like, oh, wow. Like, this has already been done way better than I ever could. And, like, have you ever had that moment where you think you've got a great idea, and then it turns out, like, what do you do? When you're just like, I came up with this cool original thing that somebody did 3 years ago.
Well,
Like, what do you do?
what do you do? I honestly think unless it's super, gosh, I don't know. I usually just do it anyway, because you're just gonna like, everything's been done. What are you gonna, there's nothing is that revolutionary or new. All materials have been used by now. The thing I think is if you make a piece that is similar to another artist's piece, you have to be conscious of it and in a way almost maybe reference it or don't. It's just a matter of like consciousness. Like me making a bunch of pillows means I know about Dan Webb's pillow. It means I know about Felix Gonzalez Torres. Like I don't want to be like, hey, I'm making pillows. What do pillows mean to people? Like let's have a pillow fight. But you have to have this. I think that's the most important part is knowing the history of art and where your new idea lies within the context of that. Yes, way up there.
Hey, I was just wondering, like, in reference to kind of the deer jaw piece and like finding that material in nature and then using it to make something, what your relationship is to the materials that you use that you say like come from Germany or California, and your like what your relationship to those places and how that plays into like those materials and kind of how maybe they're a little bit more removed since you don't exactly know like you don't find them, and like your relationship to like finding objects in nature versus like having somebody else like find them or something.
Yeah. Gosh, that's an interesting thought. I mean, I think most of my pieces, because I buy them in a rock shop or on the internet or from a guy in China that takes a month to send it to me, that just happened. But the content is not in where it came from. The content is what a kick-ass rock. And I was really bummed at I was looking for these really, kind of like the necklace I have on, these crazy, huge piece of titanium quartz, and the only place I could find it was China, and I was really bummed about that. Because I like a lot of my crystals and this one come from a guy in Arkansas that when he sends them to me, he wraps them in pages from a hymn book from his church. I don't know what that's about, but there's something really sweet about knowing this guy has a mine in Arkansas and he's lovingly sending, I don't know, but I have this whole other philosophy about where things are sourced from and where things are made and all that kind of political stuff around, like who made this shirt and was it made in America and who made the fabric. But I don't know that all of that contributes to my content that much, because I'm not a rock hound. I don't go climb mountains and dig up rocks, unfortunately. Not too much, anyway. Ooh, yes, way, way back there.
I was wondering about your relationship with your sketchbook. Do you have one?
Relationship with the what?
Your sketchbook.
Oh, my sketchbook. Do I have it with me? My sketchbook is more like a lot of scribbles. It's not like fine drawings, usually. And especially with planning out a show. By the way, I have a show at Platform March 27th that's coming up. But laying out the show, figuring out how many pieces I have for the show. But there's a lot of doodles and ideas, and a lot of it is quotes, a lot of it's titles. I keep a journal that I have since high school, which is horrifying to think of the old ones. But anyway, in the back of it, when I'm writing, I'll come up with a title out of what I'm writing, and then I'll write it in the back of journal. So I think my sketchbook serves in that way. I do almost always have it with me. It's not so much drawing as it is concepts in some way. Yeah?
First of all, have you seen Beauty is Embarrassing?
Beauty is Embarrassing?
Yeah.
Is that a movie?
Yeah, it's a documentary about an artist whose name I can't remember. He recently got kind of famous doing a bunch of word paintings. Like you can find these paintings at flea markets and paint. He also did stuff on Beauty Playhouse. Unrelated. You just said that sentence. I thought probably you should see that movie.
I probably should.
But the question I have is, you're kind of talking about sourcing resources like from places that it's only possible for you to access through the internet, like not just on Instagram and getting feedback from Instagram, but also like getting rocks from Arkansas.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that sort of brings up an interesting like question about your work, which would be like what needs to be the case for your work to exist and for you to have a career, especially with like the way you've become so like well known through the internet. I think that's sort of
That is weird.
a good context to
I'm kind of horrible about,
your work.
if I can get it on the internet, I will get it on the internet. I mean, rather than going to a mall and parking, and I mean, but that's right, you're right, I wouldn't have a lot of my materials. Although, I will tell you, if I'm traveling and there's a weird rock shop in Torrington, Wyoming, and we drive by, I will say, turn around. There is a rock shop in Torrington, Wyoming, that I got some really cool stuff from. And people that own rock shops are the kookiest, might have teeth, might not. You know, and they know everything about rocks, and they're so excited to talk to you about it. I love them. It's really fun to travel and accumulate rocks. It can get kind of expensive, though. But anyone else? She's got it almost.
How do you know what you're getting online? Like, I looked at pictures of crystals and stuff online, and like the color sometimes looks weird. Like, how do you know what you're getting when you're ordering these like crystals online?
That's why I try to keep working with the guy in Arkansas, because I have gotten crap from eBay. Be careful with eBay. You don't know, and especially if it's from God knows where. Try to find someone you trust. That's probably true of anything. Yes, sir?
Did you ever do ceramics in school?
Yes. Well, we didn't have it in college, but I did in high school.
Okay.
I still love clay. I still have a hard time controlling it, but yeah.
But when did you decide to become like a carver?
It chose me. I didn't choose. No, when Gene Simmons' divine vision came to me, I don't know. Some weird thing happened when I went to the basement there and saw all those rocks. Because I remember I bought rocks. I came outside and then I called my dad. I bought some rocks. I knew it was this life-changing thing that I didn't know why. I don't know. It was, I don't know, it's how you fall into anything that you're like, oh, this is it, finally. Which the funny thing is now that my lungs are so sensitive to alabaster, I'm trying to figure out how to just make part of it alabaster, or work with other materials, or maybe try another stone, or it's, because I really did have a doctor tell me, don't carve anymore, and there's nothing, it's like telling a photographer, you can't take any more pictures, you know. So, I mean, I might be employing people to help me carve, but I'm trying to look at that problem as an opportunity of because I think you can get stuck in what you're good at in the material that you're used to using, and I think it's good to mix it up and force yourself to do that in some ways. Turn lemons into lemonade. Yeah?
This isn't really a question, it's more of a comment. While we're talking about where you get your materials from, I think it's cool in that usually, at least I assume that artists have this weird artist supply place where they go and they get all their magical art materials, but it's nice, I guess, to compare your experience with my experience, because I'm in the same place when I'm getting materials. I'm going on eBay and finding stuff that I like there rather than finding this hidden artist supply chest.
Yeah, I've gotten some on weird, like healingcrystal.com. You know, the other thing that about the jewelry and the crystals is that I'm not totally sure I believe any of the powers of crystals or all the vibrations and all that, but I love looking into like what stones in my ring, what that meant, what its history is, how it's been used in Egypt, and what powers it might have, even if it's totally. What I'm interested in is not that the thing gives you power, but that you think it does. That's what's more interesting to me. Anyone? Are we good? Oh, yes.
So I'm really interested in the rules that we create for ourselves as artists. Like, can't work in that material, or I can't apply paint to this and that. And I find it fascinating the labor that you went through to create the pillows, you know, and this tenacity to learn carving, be self-taught in a way. But then this sort of, when it comes to the jewelry, you know, quote unquote, the jewelry, you're, you know, saying that you're not interested in learning how to solder, or there's a different approach to that craft than in your carving. And this is in no way critical or criticism. It's just an interest in why, you know, to be so focused and intense on learning to carve and do it all yourself. You know, where you could have that water jet cut pillow or something like that.
Oh
But then
man,
to-
now you tell me.
But then to not have that with the jewelry, where I don't see that much of a difference between the ideas that are fueling the work.
That is, I think it's because I took do you know Janet Bravik? I took a little one-on-one class with her, and it was probably one of the best jewelers in Seattle, and I was like, I need to learn all this, and it's actually so excruciatingly difficult that I felt like I need a whole lifetime to learn that, and I really like working with the wax, and I really like heating it, and most everything I can do with wax, so I thought it was necessary for me to learn all those things, but for the way I make it, I guess it's kind of this weird renegade way of making jewelry too, is like, I think it's like this finish on it, I use an angle grinder, which I don't think any other jewelers do. I did it to cut something off once, and then I liked the finish, and then I don't know. I don't think there's a right way to do things. I don't even know if I think there's a right way to carve, or that it had to do with like efficiency of why I was watching YouTube videos. I was like, this system is not working that I'm using. I don't know, that's an interesting question. I don't know if I answered it.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a quandary, you know, in a way. You know, somebody's like, you know, apply paint to it. I can't do that. I gotta use the paint that's on there.
Yeah, I don't know. It's funny because I think I met someone that was thinking about starting a jewelry line, and I don't know. Sometimes I just do things and I don't even mean to do them. But I'd rather do something than talk about doing it, or you know, someday. And even if it's total failure, like what's the worst thing can happen? You waste a bunch of metal and money, and you wear a whole bunch of cool necklaces the rest of your life. Anyway, anyone else? Yes?
How exactly did you begin to get into the more heavier stones?
How did I begin to what the heavier stones?
To work with heavier stones, like how did you learn, how did you get the materials as well as a beginner?
Oh. I mean, I always used an angle grinder and self-taught, and I only had done that one pillow piece before that took me, I had a residency in Wyoming, and I did it the whole time, every day. Were you asking me how I learned to do that?
How did you decide to use the material?
Oh.
And
Oh, how did I get it?
what age or what time in your life you began to use those heavy materials?
I'm not sure I totally heard you. I'm sorry. Did you want to interpret?
You went to the sculpture store in New York, it seems like.
Yeah, basically, for me, like what bothered me about the rocks I made the final pillows out of is I didn't get to choose those in person, and that drove me insane, which might have been a mistake actually, because I usually like things that have a lot of veins in them, that are way more active, or maybe like more color variation, not as translucent and like bodily like as those are. So I had to do with like going to New York and being blown away by rocks, and they'll ship it to you. If you need a rock, go to Manhattan. Clearly, that's the place to go. Is anyone else? No? Good to go?
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
So,